The first bullet that changed Fletcher Lane's life didn't kill him, but it should have. And that was precisely why he stood at the altar on a gray November morning in 1878, staring at a woman he had never met before yesterday. The church in Lead, South Dakota, smelled of pine and candle wax, and the preacher's words seemed to come from somewhere far away, muffled like he was hearing them underwater. Fletcher's side still ached where the wound had healed crooked, a constant reminder that life was unpredictable and cruel, and the only certainty was that everything you loved would eventually be taken from you. He had loved once, deeply and completely, and when cholera took Mary and their unborn child 3 years ago, something inside him had simply stopped working. Not his heart, though sometimes he wished it had been that clean. No, it was something less tangible, the part of a man that reaches for tomorrow with hope instead of resignation. The woman beside him was named Theodora Miller, and she was 23 years old, which made her 4 years younger than Fletcher. She had arrived on the stagecoach 2 days ago with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a letter from the agency that arranged marriages for Western territories. Fletcher had never intended to send for a bride. The idea had come from his friend Samuel, who ran the general store and worried too much about other people's business. Samuel had written the letter without Fletcher's knowledge, and by the time Fletcher found out, Theodora was already halfway across the country, having sold everything she owned to make the journey from Pennsylvania. Turning her away would have been not just cruel but impossible. She had no money to return, no family waiting for her. Pennsylvania had been emptied of hope for her just as surely as South Dakota had been emptied of hope for him. So here they stood, two strangers bound by circumstance, and the words of a preacher who had married so many desperate couples that he no longer bothered to make eye contact during the ceremony. Fletcher glanced sideways at his bride. She was tall for a woman, with dark auburn hair pinned up beneath a simple bonnet, and eyes the color of creek water in spring, that peculiar mix of green and brown that changed with the light. Her dress was plain but clean, dark blue calico that had been mended carefully at the hem. She held a small bunch of dried flowers someone had given her, though Fletcher didn't know who. Her hands were steady, he noticed. His own hands, scarred from years of ranch work and that one terrible year riding with the cavalry before he came to his senses, trembled slightly as he slipped the thin gold band onto her finger. It had been Mary's ring. He had kept it in a drawer for 3 years, unable to look at it but unable to sell it either. And last night he had polished it clean with shaking hands and told himself that Mary would have understood. Mary, who had been soft where this woman looked strong, who had laughed easily where this woman's face seemed carved from stone. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Fletcher turned to his bride with the understanding that he was supposed to kiss her now. Her eyes met his, and he saw no joy there, but no fear either. Just a kind of quiet determination that he recognized because he saw it in his own reflection every morning. He leaned forward and pressed his lips briefly to hers, a gesture empty of everything except obligation, and then it was done. The few people who had gathered for the wedding dispersed quickly. Samuel clapped Fletcher on the shoulder and welcomed Theodora to lead with too much enthusiasm, trying to fill the silence that neither Fletcher nor Theodora seemed inclined to break. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, had prepared a small meal for them at her establishment, but Fletcher had declined. He wanted to get back to the ranch before dark, and it was already past noon. He had brought the wagon instead of riding horseback, and he helped Theodora up onto the seat without meeting her eyes. The ride out of Lead took them past the homestake mine, where men disappeared into the earth every day and came back up covered in gold dust and desperation. The town had exploded in size since gold was discovered 2 years earlier, and now it sprawled across the hills in a jumble of wooden buildings and canvas tents, saloons and supply stores, and the kind of places Fletcher tried not to think about. Beyond the town, the Black Hills rose dark and beautiful against the pale November sky, ponderosa pines covering the slopes like a thick blanket. The air was cold and carried the promise of snow. Theodora sat beside him in silence for the first hour. Fletcher didn't mind silence. He had lived alone for 2 years, ever since his ranch hand quit to try his luck in the gold fields. The ranch was small, just enough cattle to make a living if you worked hard and luck stayed on your side, which it rarely did. He had a decent house, better than most, 2 rooms with a sleeping loft and a stone fireplace that he had built himself the first winter. It wasn't much, but it was his, paid for with money he had saved during his years working other people's ranches. Finally, Theodora spoke. Her voice was lower than he expected and clear. "I want you to know that I will work hard. I am not afraid of work." Fletcher kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "I didn't figure you were coming all this way. The agency told me you had a ranch. They did not tell me much else." "There's not much else to tell. It is a small operation, 50 head of cattle, some chickens, a milk cow. I grow hay for winter feed. It keeps me alive. You have help, just me now. I had a hand, but he left." She was quiet for a moment. "So you needed someone to help with the work." It wasn't quite a question, but Fletcher answered anyway. "I did not send for you. My friend Samuel, he thought he was doing me a favor. By the time I knew about it, you were already on your way. I am sorry if that changes things." "Changes them to what? I am already here. We are already married." Her voice was matter of fact, not bitter. "I came because I had no reason to stay in Pennsylvania. My parents died last year within 3 months of each other. My father's debts took everything. I could have worked in a factory or tried to find a position as a domestic, but I wanted something different. I wanted land and sky and a life that belonged to me, even if I have to share it with a stranger." Fletcher felt something in his chest twist, just slightly. "I will not pretend this is a love match, but I will treat you fairly. You will have a roof and food, and I will not raise my hand to you. That is the best I can promise. That is more than some women get. I will keep your house and help with the work, and I will not complain. That is what I can promise." They settled back into silence, but it felt different now, less awkward. An understanding had been reached. This was a partnership born of necessity, nothing more. Fletcher found that easier to accept than the alternative. He could not love again. The wound Mary's death had left was too deep, and he had cauterized it deliberately, sealing himself off from that kind of vulnerability. But he could work alongside another person. He could be fair and decent. That much was still within his capacity. The ranch appeared in the valley below as they crested a hill, and Fletcher felt the usual mixture of pride and exhaustion that came with seeing it. The house was small but solid. The barn needed some repairs before winter truly set in, and the fences were in decent shape. Cattle dotted the pasture, grazing on the last of the autumn grass. Smoke rose from the chimney, which surprised him until he remembered he had left the fire banked that morning. He pulled the wagon up to the house and climbed down, then reached up to help Theodora. She accepted his hand but released it the moment her feet touched the ground. She stood looking at the house, the barn, the sweep of valley surrounded by pine-covered hills, and Fletcher tried to see it through her eyes. It must have looked impossibly remote after the cities and towns of the East. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. Lead was a hard 2-hour ride, longer in bad weather. "It is very quiet," she said finally. "Yes, I think I will like that." Fletcher picked up her carpet bag from the wagon bed. It weighed almost nothing. Everything she owned in the world, he realized, fit in one small bag. He led her into the house, where the fire in the stone fireplace had indeed kept the main room warm. The space was clean but spare. A table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair that had been Mary's, a shelf with a few books, a trunk that served as both storage and seating. The kitchen area was just a corner with a cast iron stove, a dry sink, and some shelves for supplies. A door led to the bedroom, which Fletcher had given up years ago, preferring to sleep in the loft where the memories were less thick. "The bedroom is yours," he said, setting down her bag. "I sleep up there." He gestured to the ladder leading to the loft. Theodora looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "We are married, in name. I will not force expectations on you that we did not agree to." "I agreed to marry you. I understood what that meant." Fletcher felt heat rise in his face. "I am offering you privacy." "I thought you would prefer it." "What I prefer is not to be treated like a burden or an obligation that must be managed delicately. If you do not want a wife in truth, then we should have clarity about that now." Her eyes were steady on his, and Fletcher realized that beneath her calm exterior was a spine of pure steel. "I do not know what I want," he admitted, the honesty surprising him. "I have not thought about wanting anything in a long time. I am just trying to get through each day without too much damage." Her expression softened slightly. "Then let us both just try to get through each day. I will take the bedroom and you will keep the loft, and we will see what happens." "Agreed, agreed." She picked up her bag and went into the bedroom, closing the door behind her. Fletcher stood in the main room feeling like he had just survived something, though he wasn't sure what. He went outside to tend to the horses and the cattle, grateful for the familiar rhythm of chores that required no emotional navigation. When he came back inside as the sun was setting, the smell of cooking food hit him immediately. Theodora had found the supplies he kept stocked and had prepared a meal of salt pork, beans, and cornbread. The table was set for 2. She had removed her bonnet, and her hair caught the firelight, revealing threads of copper among the darker auburn. She had rolled up her sleeves and there was a smudge of flour on her cheek. "I was not sure what you liked, so I made what I know," she said. "It smells good. I have been eating mostly hard bread and jerky. I am not much of a cook." They sat down to eat, and the food was better than good. It was the kind of meal that spoke of care and skill, and Fletcher realized with a start that he had not had anyone cook for him since Mary died. He had forgotten what it felt like to sit at a table with another person, to hear the small sounds of another human being sharing space with you. "You are a good cook," he said. "My mother taught me. She said a woman should be able to make a good meal out of almost nothing. We had a lot of practice with that." There was no self-pity in her voice, just fact. What was Pennsylvania like? Crowded, dirty in the cities. "My father worked in a textile mill after we lost the farm. The air there made him sick, I think. That is what weakened him before the fever came." She paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. "I am glad to be away from it. Even if this is strange and I do not know what I am doing, at least the air is clean." Fletcher found himself wanting to say something comforting, but he didn't know what, so he just nodded. They finished the meal in silence, and then Theodora cleared the dishes and heated water to wash them. Fletcher watched her move around the small kitchen space with growing efficiency, learning where things were kept, establishing her place in this new environment. There was something both unsettling and reassuring about having another person in his space again. When the dishes were done, Theodora sat in the rocking chair near the fire with some mending she had found in a basket. Fletcher realized the basket had been full of his shirts and trousers, all needing repairs he had never gotten around to. He sat at the table with the accounts book, tallying up what he would need to buy before winter closed in completely, trying not to be too aware of the soft creaking of the rocking chair and the small sounds of needle through fabric. "Fletcher," Theodora said after a while, and hearing his name in her voice was oddly intimate. "May I ask you something?" "You can ask." "What happened to you? I do not mean to pry, but I can see that you are wounded, not just the way you favor your left side, but something deeper. I understand if you do not want to talk about it, but if we are to live together, it might help me to understand." Fletcher closed the accounts book and stared into the fire. Part of him wanted to tell her it was none of her business, but another part, the part he thought he had buried, recognized the olive branch she was extending. She had shared her story. It was only fair. "I was married before," he said slowly. "Her name was Mary. She was from St. Louis, came west with her family. We met at a church social and married within 3 months. We were young and stupid and happy." He paused, the old pain pressing against his ribs. "She got pregnant our first year. We were excited, scared but excited. That winter, cholera came through. It took a lot of people. It took Mary and the baby she was carrying. I buried them on a hill overlooking the valley. After that, I just worked. I did not see much point in anything else. I am sorry. That is a terrible thing." "Yes." "And the wound in my side, that came from a different kind of stupidity. I got involved in something I should not have last year, a dispute over water rights that turned violent. I was trying to help a neighbor and took a bullet for my trouble. The neighbor lost his land anyway and left the territory. I survived but learned that trying to help people is often pointless." Theodora was quiet for a long moment. "I do not think it is pointless. I think it is hard, and sometimes the outcome is not what we hope, but that does not make the effort pointless. You could have let me turn around and go back. You could have sent me away when you found out your friend sent for me without your knowledge, but you did not. That was not pointless to me. It was everything." Fletcher felt something crack inside his chest, a small fissure in the wall he had built. "I am not a good man, Theodora. I do not know if I can be what you need. I do not need you to be a good man. I need you to be an honest one, and so far you have been that." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw that her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her expression was calm. This woman had lost as much as he had, maybe more, and yet she sat there mending his clothes and speaking of honesty and effort as if the world had not tried to break her. He felt ashamed of his self-pity and admiration for her strength in equal measure. "What should I call you?" he asked. "Theodora seems formal." "My mother called me Thee. I have not heard it in a long time. I would like to hear it again." "Thee," he repeated, and she smiled, just a little, the first real smile he had seen from her. The days that followed established a rhythm. Fletcher woke before dawn and did the morning chores while Thee made breakfast. They ate together, and then the work of the day began. Thee proved to be as capable as she had promised. She could milk the cow, gather eggs, and help mend fences without complaint. She learned quickly what needed to be done and did it. In the afternoons, she worked in the house, cleaning and organizing and making small improvements that Fletcher noticed but did not comment on. Curtains appeared in the windows, made from fabric she had somehow conjured from her meager supplies. The shelves were rearranged for better efficiency. The house began to feel lived in again. At night, they sat by the fire. Sometimes they talked, careful conversations that revealed small pieces of themselves. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, Fletcher with his accounts or mending tack, Thea with needlework or one of his books. She read voraciously, he discovered. The small collection of books he owned was consumed within the first week, and she asked shyly if he might bring more from town when he went. He found himself looking forward to these evenings, to the quiet companionship that asked nothing of him but presence. 3 weeks into their marriage, the first real snow came. Fletcher woke to a world transformed, everything covered in white, the silence so complete it felt like the earth was holding its breath. He came down from the loft to find Thea already up, standing at the window in her nightgown and a shawl, watching the snow fall. "I have never seen anything so beautiful," she said softly. "In the city, snow was just something that made everything muddy and difficult. But here, it is like the world is clean." Fletcher stood beside her, watching the fat flakes drift down. "It is beautiful until you have to work in it, then it is just cold." She laughed, a sound he had not heard before, and it struck him how much younger she looked when she laughed. "You are very practical, Fletcher. Someone has to be, perhaps, or perhaps someone needs to teach you to see the beauty again." He looked at her, surprised. "Is that what you are trying to do? I do not know. Maybe I am trying to teach myself. I spent so long being afraid and tired that I forgot to look for beautiful things. I do not want to live that way anymore." The snow continued to fall, and they stood together watching it, and Fletcher felt that crack in his chest widen a little more. This woman, who had every reason to be bitter and closed off, was choosing something different. She was choosing to see beauty in a snowfall, to find hope in a difficult situation, to offer kindness to a man who had been nothing but cold to her. He did not understand it, but he felt drawn to it the way a man dying of thirst is drawn to water. The winter deepened, and with it came the true test of their partnership. The cattle needed constant attention, breaking ice on the water troughs, hauling hay through snowdrifts, checking for sickness and injury. Fletcher worked until his body ached, and Thea worked beside him, never complaining even when her hands were red and raw from the cold. They moved together with increasing synchronization, learning each other's rhythms, anticipating needs before they were spoken. One particularly brutal day, Fletcher was working to free a cow that had gotten stuck in a drift when his bad side gave out. Pain shot through him like fire, and he went down on one knee with a gasp he could not suppress. Thea was beside him immediately, her hand on his shoulder. "You are hurt." "I am fine. Just the old wound acting up in the cold." "You are not fine. Come inside. The cow can wait." "The cow will freeze if I do not get her out." "Then I will get her out. You go inside and warm up." Fletcher wanted to argue, but the pain was making him dizzy. He let Thea help him back to the house. Each step in agony he tried to hide and failed. She got him settled in the rocking chair close to the fire, then went back out into the storm. He sat there feeling useless and angry with himself, listening to the wind howl and worrying about her out there alone. But 20 minutes later, she came back in, covered in snow and breathing hard. "The cow is free and back with the herd," she announced, stripping off her wet outer layers. "You should not have done that alone, if something had happened to you out there." "But nothing did happen. I am fine, and so is the cow. Fletcher, I am not fragile. I know you have been hurt and you have lost people and you are afraid to let anyone get close enough to hurt you again. But I am here now. I am your wife. Let me help carry some of the weight." He stared at her, snow melting in her hair, her cheeks flushed from cold and exertion, her eyes fierce with determination, and something shifted in him. She was right. He had been treating her like she was temporary, like she might disappear if he acknowledged how much he was coming to rely on her. But she was real and solid, and she was not going anywhere. "I am afraid," he admitted, the words feeling like they were torn from somewhere deep inside. "I am afraid to care about you. I am afraid of what it will do to me if I lose you too." Thea came and knelt beside the rocking chair, taking his cold hands in her own. "I am afraid too. I am afraid that I came all this way and you will never see me as anything more than help you did not ask for. I am afraid that I will spend my whole life living beside you without ever really reaching you. But Fletcher, Being afraid is not a reason to stop trying. It is a reason to try harder. He looked down at their joined hands, hers smaller but just as work-worn as his, and felt the last of his resistance crumble. I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to let someone in again. Then we will learn together, one day at a time. That is all we can do. He pulled her up and into his arms, holding her tightly, and she held him back just as fiercely. They stayed like that for a long time, snow melting from their clothes, the fire crackling beside them, two wounded people finding shelter in each other. That night, Fletcher did not climb to the loft. He followed Thea into the bedroom, and she turned to him with a question in her eyes that he answered by kissing her. This kiss was nothing like the perfunctory one at their wedding. This was need and fear and hope all tangled together, and when she kissed him back, he felt something in him that had been frozen for 3 years begin to thaw. They made love carefully, tenderly, learning each other's bodies the way they had learned to work together, with patience and attention. Thea's hands were gentle over the scar on his side, and when she looked at him, he did not see pity but acceptance. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, her head on his chest, his hand in her hair, and Fletcher felt peace for the first time in longer than he could remember. "I am falling in love with you," he whispered into the darkness. "I did not think I could, but I am." "I know," she whispered back. "I have been falling in love with you since the day you admitted you were trying to just get through each day. You were honest with me when you could have lied. That was when I knew you were someone I could love. I do not deserve you. That is not for you to decide. I am here by choice, Fletcher. I choose you. I choose this life. I choose us." He held her closer, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his ribs, and let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he could have this. That maybe he could be happy again without it being a betrayal of what he had lost before. The winter continued its harsh grip on the land, but inside the small ranch house, something was blooming. Fletcher found himself smiling again, laughing at Thea's dry observations about the chickens or her dramatic readings from the books he brought back from town. She sang while she worked, old songs from her childhood that she taught him, and they would sing together doing chores, their voices rising into the cold air. He taught her to ride properly, and they would take the horses out on clear days, riding through the snowy landscape, her laughter ringing out when her horse kicked up powder. But life in the Dakota Territory was never easy, and reminders of that came in February when Samuel rode out from Lead with bad news. A gang of outlaws had been working their way through the isolated ranches, stealing cattle and horses, burning buildings. Several families had lost everything. "They are getting bolder," Samuel said, warming himself by the fire while Thea poured coffee. "The marshal in Lead has sent for help from Deadwood, but until more law arrives, people are vulnerable, especially folks living out alone like you two. I wanted to warn you." Fletcher felt the old wariness settle over him. "How many in the gang?" "Reports say 5 or 6. They are well armed and they do not leave witnesses who can identify them." Samuel glanced at Thea apologetically. "I do not mean to scare you, Mrs. Lane, but you should know what you are facing." "I appreciate the warning," Thea said calmly. "We will be careful." After Samuel left, Fletcher checked his weapons. He had a rifle, a shotgun, and a pistol he had carried during his brief time with the cavalry. He cleaned and loaded them all, then taught Thea how to shoot. She was a natural, her hand steady and her eye good. They set up targets behind the barn and practiced until she could hit what she aimed at more often than not. "I hope we never need this," Fletcher said, watching her reload the rifle with growing confidence. "So do I. But I am glad to know how, just in case." They took precautions. Fletcher moved the cattle closer to the house where he could keep a better eye on them. They kept the weapons close and took turns staying awake part of the night to listen for trouble. The vigilance was exhausting, but it was necessary. Fletcher found himself grateful again for Thea's presence. He could not imagine trying to protect the ranch alone while worrying about her safety in town. At least here, he could watch over her. The attack came on a moonless night in late February. Fletcher woke to the sound of the cattle panicking, and he was out of bed with the rifle in his hands before his eyes were fully open. Thea was right behind him, grabbing the shotgun. "Stay in the house," Fletcher ordered, moving toward the door. "Absolutely not. You are not going out there alone." There was no time to argue. Fletcher could hear men's voices now and the sound of horses. He eased the door open and saw dark figures moving among his cattle, trying to separate and drive them off. Rage flooded through him, hot and fierce. He had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let thieves take what was his. He stepped out onto the porch and fired a warning shot into the air. "Get off my land." The response was immediate gunfire that splintered the wood of the doorframe inches from his head. Fletcher dove back inside, pulling Thea down with him. More shots followed, and Fletcher realized with cold clarity that these men were not going to leave just because he asked. They were going to take what they wanted and probably kill him and Thea in the process. "The bedroom window," Thea said urgently. "You can get a clear shot from there at the angle they are positioned." Fletcher looked at her in surprise. She was right. The bedroom window faced the side where most of the gunfire was coming from. He ran to the bedroom while Thea covered the front and positioned himself at the window. In the faint light from the snow, he could see 3 men clearly. He took aim and fired, and one of the men went down with a scream. The others scattered, taking cover behind the barn and the water trough. From the front of the house, Thea fired the shotgun, and Fletcher heard someone curse in pain. His wife, he realized with a mixture of terror and pride, was holding her own. He reloaded and waited for another clear shot. The standoff continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then suddenly, he heard the sound of multiple horses approaching fast. More of them, he thought desperately, but then someone shouted, "Marshal," and he realized help had arrived. Samuel must have alerted the law and they had been on patrol nearby. The outlaws, outnumbered now, made a break for their horses. Fletcher got off one more shot, winging another one, and then they were gone, disappearing into the darkness. The marshal, a grizzled man named Tom Hendricks, checked the area while his deputies secured the one outlaw Fletcher had shot more seriously. The man would live to stand trial, which was more mercy than he deserved. Another outlaw had been wounded by Thea's shotgun blast and left a blood trail that would be easy to follow in daylight. "You two did well," Marshal Hendricks said, accepting coffee from Thea as dawn began to break. "Most folks freeze up when shooting starts. You kept your heads and held them off until we got here." "My wife is the one who deserves credit," Fletcher said, looking at Thea with open admiration. "She stood her ground and fought like she was born to it." Thea's cheeks flushed pink, but she met his eyes steadily. "I was protecting what is mine. I have lost too much already. I was not going to lose this too." After the marshal and his men left, taking the wounded outlaw with them, Fletcher and Thea surveyed the damage. A few cattle had been scattered but none lost. There were bullet holes in the house that would need patching, but nothing structural. They had been lucky, incredibly lucky. Fletcher pulled Thea into his arms and held her tightly. "You could have been killed, when I think about what could have happened. But it did not happen. We are both fine. We protected our home together." "Our home," he repeated, and realized it was true. Somewhere along the way, this had stopped being his ranch that he allowed her to live on and had become their home, built together through work and trust and growing love. "Our home," she confirmed. and no one is going to take it from us. Spring came slowly to the Black Hills, the snow reluctant to release its grip. But when it finally did, the valley exploded with life. Wildflowers covered the meadows and the cattle grew fat on new grass. Fletcher and Thea worked from dawn to dusk, repairing winter damage, branding new calves, preparing for the year ahead. Samuel came by regularly, bringing supplies and news from Lead. The outlaw gang had been broken up, with most members captured or killed. The territory was safer now, though it would never be truly safe. On a warm evening in May, Fletcher and Thea sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the hills gold and purple. Thea's hand rested on her belly, which had just begun to swell with the baby they had made during those cold winter nights. Fletcher had been terrified when she first told him, all the old fears rushing back. But Thea had taken his face in her hands and made him look at her. "I am not Mary," she had said firmly. "This is not then. This is now, and I am strong, and everything is going to be fine. Do you hear me? You do not get to borrow trouble from the future. You have to be here now with me." And he had tried. He tried every day to stay present, to not let fear steal his joy. It was not easy. Sometimes the old nightmares came back, but Thea was always there, steady and sure, pulling him back to the present. "What are you thinking about?" she asked now, her head on his shoulder. "I am thinking about how wrong I was," he said. "About what?" "About everything. I thought I was done, that the best parts of life were behind me. I thought I would just work until I died and that would be enough. I expected nothing from our marriage except maybe a little help with the chores and someone to talk to occasionally. But you gave me everything. You gave me hope and joy and a reason to wake up in the morning. You gave me love when I had convinced myself I did not want it or need it. You gave me a future I never knew to ask for." Thea tilted her face up to his, tears shining in her eyes. "You gave me those things too. You gave me a home and safety and partnership. You could have been cruel or indifferent, but instead you were honest and kind. You let me in even though you were terrified. That took more courage than fighting off outlaws." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and felt the baby move between them, a flutter of life that was part him and part her and entirely their future. "I love you," he said. "I love you more than I thought I could love anything. I love you too, and I am not going anywhere. You are stuck with me, Fletcher Lane. Best thing that ever happened to me." The summer was good to them. The cattle thrived, and Fletcher was able to sell a dozen steers at a price that let him pay off the last of his debt on the land. The ranch was truly his now, truly theirs. He bought Thea fabric for new dresses to accommodate her growing belly, and books she had mentioned wanting to read, and a rocking cradle that he spent weeks building in the barn as a surprise. Neighbors began stopping by more frequently. The Johnsons from the next valley over, the Petersons from the north, other families scattered across the hills. They brought food and company, and gradually a community formed. Thea bloomed in these gatherings, her natural warmth drawing people to her. Fletcher, who had been solitary for so long, found he did not mind the intrusion. It felt good to be part of something larger than himself again. In early October, on a day when the aspens were burning gold against the evergreens, Thea went into labor. Fletcher had arranged for Mrs. Johnson to come stay with them as the time grew near, and the older woman took charge with calm efficiency while Fletcher paced and prayed and tried not to let his fear consume him. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Fletcher thought his heart would tear itself from his chest. But Thea was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined, and when the baby finally came, her cry was lusty and loud. "A boy, Mrs. Johnson announced, cleaning the baby and wrapping him in a soft blanket. "A fine, healthy boy." Fletcher approached the bed where Thea lay exhausted but smiling, and she held out the baby to him. He took his son carefully, barely breathing, and looked down at the tiny face, the dark hair, the fingers that wrapped instinctively around his thumb. "He is perfect," Fletcher whispered. "He is ours," Thea said. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Fletcher knew. "Samuel, after the friend who sent for you, the friend who saved my life by bringing you into it." Thea's eyes filled with tears. "Samuel Lane, it is perfect." Little Samuel proved to be a good baby, healthy and strong. He had Fletcher's dark hair and Thea's green-brown eyes and a temperament that was surprisingly calm. Fletcher, who had been terrified of fatherhood, found himself completely enchanted. He would hold his son for hours, just watching him sleep, marveling at the tiny miracle of him. Thea would laugh and tell him that he was spoiling the baby, but her eyes were soft with love. The winter that followed was hard again, as winters always were in the Black Hills, but the house was full of life and warmth. Samuel grew and thrived, and Thea sang to him the same songs she had sung to Fletcher. Fletcher would come in from the cold to find his wife and son by the fire, and the sight of them would make his throat tight with emotion. This was what he had thought he would never have again. A family. A home filled with love instead of ghosts on Christmas morning, with snow falling softly outside and Samuel gurgling happily in his cradle. Fletcher and Thea sat together drinking coffee and watching the fire. "You remember last year?" Thea asked. "How we sat here and you told me about Mary and I told you about my parents. I remember. It feels like a lifetime ago." "In a way it was. We were different people then. I was so scared, Fletcher. I tried to be brave, but inside I was terrified that I had made a terrible mistake coming here. That you would resent me forever, and I would be trapped in a marriage with someone who could not stand the sight of me." Fletcher pulled her close. "And now I know I made the best decision of my life. You are my home, Fletcher. You and Samuel. Everything I ever wanted and did not dare to hope for." "I expected nothing," Fletcher said softly. "From marriage, from life, from anything. I had closed myself off so completely that I did not even know what I was missing. But you, my loving wife, you gave me everything. Everything I never knew to ask for. A reason to wake up. A reason to hope. A reason to love again. You gave me back my life." Thea kissed him, and Samuel made a small sound from his cradle, and Fletcher felt a happiness so complete it was almost painful. He had been so wrong, so determined to protect himself from hurt that he had nearly missed out on this. If Samuel had not sent for Thea, if she had not been brave enough to come, if they had not both been willing to try, he would still be alone in this house, going through the motions of living without ever really being alive. The years that followed were not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and lean times. But there were also more children, 2 daughters who came in quick succession, Emma and Ruth, filling the house with noise and laughter. Fletcher expanded the ranch, buying more land and building a bigger house with enough rooms for their growing family. Thea planted a garden that became the envy of every woman in the valley, and she taught their children to read and write and find beauty in the world around them. Fletcher never forgot what he had learned, that love was not a betrayal of the past, but a gift to be treasured in the present. He kept Mary's memory in his heart, but it no longer hurt to think of her. She had been his first love, and she would always matter, but Thea was his great love, the one who had saved him from himself and given him a future worth living. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Thea back to Lead, leaving the children with the Johnsons for the day. They walked through the town that had grown even more in the decade since the gold rush began, past the homestake mine that still pulled wealth from the earth, to the little church where they had married. "You remember how terrified we both were?" Thea asked, standing in the same spot where they had spoken their vows. I remember thinking I was making a terrible mistake, that I was being forced into something I did not want and could never feel right about. And now I know it was the best day of my life, the day everything changed. The day I got you. They renewed their vows there in the empty church, with no one but themselves and God as witnesses. But this time, the words meant something. This time, when Fletcher said he would love and cherish her all the days of his life, he meant it with every fiber of his being. This time, when Thea promised to stand by him in good times and bad, her voice rang with certainty. They rode back to the ranch in the golden light of late afternoon, and as they crested the hill and saw their home spread out below them, smoke rising from the chimney and their children playing in the yard, Fletcher felt peace settle over him like a benediction. "Thank you," he said to Thea. "For what? For being patient with me, for not giving up when I was being stubborn and scared, for loving me even when I could not love myself, for giving me all of this." He gestured at the valley, the house, the life they had built. "You gave me just as much, Fletcher. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You gave me respect and partnership and love. You gave me children and a future. We gave these things to each other. That is what marriage is supposed to be." He pulled her close and kissed her, and she laughed against his lips, the sound as familiar and necessary to him as breathing. Samuel rode out to meet them on his pony, a big grin on his face. At 9 years old, he was already showing signs of the man he would become, tall and strong with his father's stubbornness and his mother's kind heart. Emma and Ruth came running behind him, their braids flying, chattering about everything they had done while their parents were gone. Fletcher dismounted and scooped up his daughters, one in each arm, while Samuel took the horses to the barn with the easy competence Fletcher had taught him. Thea stood watching her family with such love on her face that Fletcher felt his chest tighten. "Are you happy?" he asked her later, after the children were in bed and they sat together on the porch watching the stars. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," she said. "I came west expecting nothing, hoping only to survive and maybe carve out a small life for myself. Instead, I found everything. I found love and purpose and a family. I found you." "I found you too," Fletcher said, "and you saved me. You gave me back my life when I thought it was over. You taught me that it is possible to love again after loss, to hope again after disappointment, to live again after you have convinced yourself you are just existing." "We saved each other," Thea corrected gently. "That is what love does. It saves us from ourselves and gives us a reason to be better." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the night sky. A shooting star streaked across the darkness, and Thea made a wish. Fletcher did not ask what it was. He did not need to. He suspected it was the same wish he would have made. That this would continue. That they would have many more years together, watching their children grow, working their land, loving each other through whatever came. The seasons turned as seasons do. Summer gave way to autumn, autumn to winter, winter to spring. The children grew taller and more capable. Samuel began helping his father with the harder work of the ranch, learning everything Fletcher could teach him. Emma and Ruth helped their mother in the house and garden, but they also rode horses and helped with the cattle, because Thea believed her daughters should be as capable as any son. More neighbors came to the territory, and the community grew stronger. A school was built halfway between their ranch and the Johnson place, and Thea taught there twice a week, sharing her love of learning with other people's children. Fletcher served as a deputy marshal for a few years, helping keep the peace in their corner of the Black Hills. The wildness of the West was slowly being tamed, though it would never be completely civilized. Through it all, Fletcher and Thea's love deepened. The passion of their early years matured into something richer and more complex. They knew each other's bodies as well as they knew their own, knew each other's thoughts before they were spoken, knew each other's hearts completely. They still had disagreements, still frustrated each other occasionally, but they had learned to talk through problems instead of letting them fester. They had learned that love was not just a feeling but a choice, made every day in small ways and large. When Fletcher turned 40, Thea organized a party that brought together everyone they knew. The house and yard were full of people, and there was music and dancing and more food than any group could eat. Fletcher stood on the porch watching the celebration and feeling overwhelmed by the richness of his life. His children were healthy and happy. His ranch was prosperous. His wife was beloved by everyone who knew her. He had friends and community and purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Thea asked, coming to stand beside him. She was 36 now, and if anything more beautiful than she had been at 23. Motherhood and the hard work of frontier life had given her a strength and grace that took his breath away. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest man alive," he said. "I am thinking that I almost missed all of this. If you had not been brave enough to come here, if I had not been forced into a marriage I did not want, none of this would exist. I would be alone, bitter, probably dead by now from doing something stupid. But that is not what happened. You are here and I am here, and look at what we built." She gestured at the gathering, at their children laughing with friends at the home they had created. "This is real, Fletcher. This is our life, and it is beautiful. It is, thanks to you. Thanks to both of us. Stop giving me all the credit. You were willing to try. You were willing to open your heart again, even though it terrified you. That took courage I am not sure I would have had if our situations were reversed." Samuel approached them, now almost 15 and nearly as tall as Fletcher. "Dad, Mr. Johnson wants to know if you will tell the story about the outlaws again. Some of the younger kids have not heard it." Fletcher laughed. The story of the night they fought off the gang had become something of a legend in the valley, growing more dramatic with each telling. "I suppose I can tell it one more time. Make sure to include the part where Mother shot one of them," Samuel said with a grin. "That is everyone's favorite part." As Fletcher moved into the crowd to tell his story once more, Thea watched him with a full heart. This was the man she had married sight unseen, the man who had been so broken he did not think he could ever be whole again. And here he was, surrounded by people who loved him, telling stories and laughing, fully alive. She had not done that alone. They had healed each other, slowly and patiently, through countless small acts of kindness and trust. The party continued long into the night, and when everyone finally left, the family worked together to clean up, everyone tired but happy. Fletcher tucked Emma and Ruth into bed, listening to their prayers and kissing their foreheads. Samuel was old enough now to put himself to bed, but Fletcher stopped by his room anyway, and they talked for a while about the ranch and Samuel's plans for the future. Finally, Fletcher and Thea were alone in their bedroom, the house quiet around them. They helped each other undress, a familiar ritual after so many years, and climbed into bed. Thea curled against Fletcher's side, her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arms around her. "Today was perfect," she murmured. "It was. Thank you for putting it together. You are worth celebrating, Fletcher. You are a good man, a good husband, a good father. I am so proud of you." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, still faintly floral from the soap she made herself. "I love you, Thea, more than words can say. You are everything to me. And you are everything to me. We are everything to each other. That is how it should be." They lay together in the darkness, and Fletcher thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. All the pain and loss that had preceded her arrival in his life. All the fear and uncertainty of those early days. all the work and struggle and growth that had brought them to this place of deep, abiding love. It had not been easy, but it had been worth it. Every hard step had been worth it to arrive here, in this bed with this woman in this life. "What do you think the children will remember most about today?" Thea asked sleepily. "I think they will remember that their parents are loved by many people, that we are part of a community that cares about us. That love creates more love, spreading out in circles like ripples on water." "That is beautiful, Fletcher. You have become quite a poet in your old age," he laughed softly. "I have become many things I never expected to be: a husband again, a father, a man who can see joy instead of just survival. You did that. You changed everything." "We did it together," she insisted, as she always did. "Stop trying to give me all the credit. Fine. We did it together, but I still say you did the harder work. You had to crack open a very stubborn shell." "Yes, but inside that shell was a good man who just needed a reason to come out. I am glad I was patient enough to find him." They drifted into sleep, safe and warm and surrounded by the life they had built. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to the moon. The Black Hills held them close, and the valley kept their secrets, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. There was the year of the terrible drought, when they nearly lost everything before the rains finally came. There was the year Emma fell from a horse and broke her arm, and Fletcher and Thea took turns sitting up with her through the nights of pain. There was the year Ruth won a prize at the county fair for her preserves, and the year Samuel bought his first piece of land of his own, starting his own ranch in the next valley. Through all of it, Fletcher and Thea remained each other's constant. They worked side by side, aging together, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and hard living, but their spirits still strong. Fletcher's hair went gray at the temples, and Thea's hands developed arthritis that made winter mornings difficult, but they adapted and carried on. They had learned long ago that life was about enduring and adjusting and finding joy in small moments. When their first grandchild was born, a little girl that Samuel and his wife named Theodora after her grandmother, Thea wept with happiness. Fletcher held his granddaughter and felt time collapse in on itself, remembering when his own children had been this small, remembering when he had thought he would never have this experience. The circle of life continued, generation after generation, and he and Thea were part of that eternal chain. Emma married a teacher from Lead and moved into town, though she visited often. Ruth surprised everyone by deciding she did not want to marry at all, instead buying her own piece of land and running a successful horse breeding operation. Fletcher and Thea supported her choice, understanding that the world was changing, and their daughter had the right to choose her own path. On their 25th anniversary, Fletcher took Thea back to the same hilltop where he had buried Mary all those years ago. He had not been there in over 2 decades, and Thea had never been there at all. The simple wooden cross he had made was still standing, weathered but intact. "I wanted you to meet her," Fletcher said quietly. "I wanted her to know that I found happiness again. I wanted to tell her that loving you does not diminish what I felt for her." Thea took his hand and stood silently, giving him space for his memories. After a moment, Fletcher spoke again, his voice directed at the grave. "Mary, this is Theodora, though I call her Thea. She is my wife, and she is wonderful. She saved me when I did not think I could be saved. She gave me children and a life worth living. I want you to know that I did not forget you, but I also did not stop living. I think you would have liked her. I think you would have been friends." His voice broke slightly. "I hope you are at peace, wherever you are. I hope you know that you mattered, that you still matter. But I hope you also understand that I had to move forward, that living people need love from living people. They stood there a while longer, and then Fletcher turned away from the past and toward the woman beside him. Thea's eyes were wet with tears, but she was smiling. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said. "Thank you for trusting me with this. You are part of everything I am. You needed to know all of me, even the broken parts." They walked back to the horses hand in hand, and as they rode home, Fletcher felt lighter than he had in years. He had made his peace with the past completely now. Mary was a memory, precious but no longer painful. Thea was his present and his future, and that was exactly as it should be. The years became decades. Fletcher and Thea grew old together. Their children gave them grandchildren, and those grandchildren gave them great-grandchildren. The ranch they had built together prospered, and was eventually passed down to Samuel, who ran it with the same dedication his father had shown. Fletcher and Thea moved into a smaller house on the property, content to spend their final years watching the legacy they had created continue without them. On a warm spring afternoon, when Fletcher was 62 and Thea was 58, they sat on the porch of their small house watching the valley bloom with wildflowers. Fletcher's health had been declining, his heart growing weaker, and they both knew their time together was drawing to a close. But there was no bitterness in that knowledge, only a deep gratitude for the years they had shared. "You remember," Thea said, "what you told me on our 10th anniversary, about how marrying me was the best day of your life." "I remember everything about us," Fletcher said. "Every conversation, every moment, every touch, it is all precious to me. I was thinking about that day in the church when we got married, how frightened we both were, how uncertain everything seemed. If someone had told me then that we would have all of this, I am not sure I would have believed them." "I would not have believed them," Fletcher admitted. "I was so determined to protect myself from pain that I nearly missed out on joy. You taught me that the risk of love is always worth it. That closing yourself off is not protection, it is just another kind of death." Thea reached for his hand, and he took it gratefully. "I have been thinking about what happens next, after. I am not afraid, but I am sad. I do not want to leave you." "Then do not think about it. Be here now with me in this moment. That is all we ever have. This moment right here. You became very wise, Fletcher Lane. I had a good teacher." They sat in silence, holding hands, watching the play of light and shadow across the valley. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. In the distance, they could hear children laughing, probably their great-grandchildren playing near the main house. The wind carried the scent of pine and wildflowers and the rich earth itself. "I want you to know something," Fletcher said after a while. "When I am gone, and I will be gone before you, I think, because my body is giving up faster than yours. When I am gone, I want you to know that you made my life complete. You gave me everything I never knew to ask for. You taught me to hope and to love and to live. Whatever comes after this, I will carry you with me. You will be part of my soul forever." Thea was crying now, tears running down her weathered cheeks. "And you will be part of mine. You were my great adventure, Fletcher, my great love. I left everything I knew to come find you, and I would do it again 1,000 times. Every moment was worth it. Every struggle, every hardship, every uncertain day. All of it was worth it to have this love." Fletcher died 3 months later, peacefully in his sleep, with Thea beside him holding his hand. His funeral was attended by more people than could fit in the church, a testament to the life he had lived and the man he had become. He was buried on the hilltop overlooking the valley, and Thea had the words "beloved husband, father, friend" carved into his headstone. Thea lived another 5 years, staying active and involved with her family and community until the very end. When she finally joined Fletcher on that hilltop, the whole valley mourned. The preacher who conducted her service spoke of the love story that had transformed two broken people into pillars of the community, of the legacy of compassion and strength they had left behind. Samuel, now in his 40s with children of his own, stood at his mother's grave and remembered all the lessons she had taught him, about kindness and perseverance, and the importance of seeing beauty in the world, about choosing love even when it was scary, about working hard for what mattered, about being present for the people who needed you. "She saved him, you know," Samuel said to his own children. "My father was a broken man when she came. He was just going through the motions of living. But she loved him back to life. She taught him that even after the worst losses, joy was possible. That is the legacy she left us. Not just this land or this ranch, but the understanding that love heals everything if we let it." The grandchildren and great-grandchildren nodded, some crying, all of them feeling the weight of loss, but also the gift of the story they carried. Their grandparents' love story would be told and retold, passing into family legend, an inspiration for generations to come. Years later, when Samuel was old himself and telling his great-great-grandchildren about Fletcher and Thea, he would always end the story the same way. "Your great-great-grandfather expected nothing from marriage. He thought his heart was too broken to ever feel again. But your great-great-grandmother, she was made of something special. She saw past his walls and his fear, and she gave him everything. Everything he never knew to ask for. Love and hope and a reason to live. Family and joy and a legacy that continues in all of you. That is what real love does. It saves us and transforms us and creates something that lasts beyond our own lives. Remember that. Honor that. And when you find your own loves, give them everything, just as your great-great-grandparents did for each other." And the children would listen, wide-eyed and quiet, feeling connected to a past they had never known but somehow understood. The story of Fletcher and Thea became woven into the fabric of the family, a reminder that even in the hardest times, love could flourish. That two strangers could become one soul. That the risks we take on each other are always, always worth it. The ranch remained in the family for generations, each new steward respecting the legacy of the couple who had built it from nothing. The valley continued its endless cycle of seasons, and the Black Hills stood eternal watch over the land. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Fletcher and Thea were together still, their love story complete and perfect and eternal. They had expected nothing and received everything. They had started as strangers and ended as soulmates. They had built a life from dust and determination and the simple choice to try. It was not a fairy tale, because life never is. It was something better. It was real and hard-won and absolutely beautiful. It was the story of two people who found each other when they needed it most and created something that would echo through time. And that, in the end, is what love always does when we are brave enough to reach for it. It gives us everything we never knew to ask for. It saves us. It completes us. It makes us whole. The end.